Hi, I'm here to welcome you today to something incredibly dull. I know this is the greatest introduction to a podcast episode, but there's a good reason why it's dull, and there's a good reason why we should talk about it. So what I'm introducing you today is I am introducing you to late stage capitalism's favorite paradox, which is that everyone has to be unique, and somehow everyone ends up doing the same thing. So this week on the Spookcast, we're going after the spook of uniqueness. And who better to involve than Stirner? If there's one thing that our culture has perfected, it's mass-producing individuality. Whether it's Spotify Wrapped turning your music taste into a badge, or HR telling you to quote-unquote bring your authentic self to work. So uniqueness has become a job, a duty, a performance you're supposed to keep up, just so you don't look like a nobody. But there's this guy that we all know and love, if you're here listening to this, Stirner. Stirner had his own take on uniqueness back in 1844. He called it der Einzige. And what he meant is something completely different from the pastel Instagram version of uniqueness. The unique isn't an identity, it isn't an inner essence, it isn't a brand. It's something much slippier, stranger, and honestly way more liberating. And once you stop spooking yourself, you may get it. So let's try to get there. Here's how we're going to break it down. In the Spook of the Week, I will look at how uniqueness shows up in our culture, from fashion to therapy speak, whatever, and why it feels more like a demand than a gift. Then, as usual, we're going to dissect the spook. We're going to take a deep dive into the history of uniqueness and philosophy, and this is going to be pretty deep, from medieval thisness to romantic genius to modern authenticity. And then we're going to see why Stirner's refusal is so important to understand what uniqueness could be. Then in Living Ownness, we'll shift to practice, as we do. So how do you live your ownness without turning uniqueness into another chore? And as we do, we bring in Freud, Lacan, the superego, and all that juicy psychoanalytic stuff. And finally, in the spotlight, I'm actually turning the lens on my own writing, as I sometimes do, which honestly, I keep apologizing for it, but you know what, I'm just gonna be real about it. Like, I write this shit, I wanna talk about what I care about. It is what it is, my friends. I wrote an essay recently called Against Uniqueness as Stable Selfhood, and I wanna talk about it a little bit more and maybe introduce it to people that haven't yet read it. It's kind of my attempt to make Stirner's point clear, which is that the unique is not a stable self, but rather a refusal of selfhood altogether. So, in this episode, we're not just asking how to be unique, we're asking how to stop uniqueness from being another spook breathing down your neck. And we're going to keep in the back of our heads the quote, "I am not nothing in the sense of emptiness, but the creative nothing, out of which I myself create everything." Okay, this week's spook, as I said, is one that every brand, every HR manager, and every TikTok influencer loves to preach. Be yourself, you're unique, no one is you, and that is your power. So these little slogans float around in corporate PowerPoints and Instagram posts, usually pasted over a mountain of fucking latte or something. They sound empowering. They sound so empowering. But the way that our culture sells uniqueness is not the same thing Stirner meant when he talked about the unique. In fact, the way we talk about uniqueness today is a perfect example of a spook. So let's think about it. Let's think about uniqueness as a cultural obligation. So let's start with how uniqueness is treated in everyday life. Let's talk about fashion. Express yourself, right? Express yourself is a big thing in fashion. But make sure that you express yourself with pre-packaged aesthetics. Urban Outfitters will sell you quote unquote individuality for $49.99, right? You can even design your own sneakers online. How cool is that? But the format for self-expression is already set, like a paint by numbers kit. Then we have social media. So TikTok trends like main character energy literally turn uniqueness into a script. So everyone films themselves being different, quote unquote, in exactly the same fucking way. Then we have workplaces, HR departments, which tell you to bring your authentic self to work, right? To add something, to add your unique self to the company. But of course, only the positive, productive, non-threatening version of that self. Because let's be real, if any of us would bring our real self to work, that just would not work, would it? So uniqueness becomes a cultural obligation, a duty to prove that you stand out, to prove that you're special, to prove that you're not just another nobody. And ironically, that duty makes people more the same than ever. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that anxiety, the anxiety of being special. So once uniqueness becomes an obligation, it actually breeds anxiety because that's just how we work. So if everyone has to be unique, right, then uniqueness isn't a free fact of life anymore. It's a benchmark. So you compare yourself, like, am I really unique? Am I unique enough? Do my playlists, my clothes, my hobbies set me apart, or am I secretly just another copy of a copy? And this anxiety is exactly how the spook grips you, because it's not that uniqueness is bad in itself. It's that the ideal of uniqueness becomes something you measure yourself against. So something you're supposed to live up to. And that's when Stirner would say, you're spooked. So if you want the clearest sign that uniqueness has become a spook, then look at how easily it fits into the marketplace. So I think a really good example is this fucking annoying Spotify rap bullshit. So Spotify rap makes your music taste into like a literal badge of individuality, right? But the same 5 artists are dominating every single result because that's just what the fucking algorithm is feeding people, okay? So that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Think about it. Then we have personality tests, like the Myers-Briggs bullshit that tells you what kind of unique snowflake you are or whatever. So along with millions of others who got the same label, you're somehow like categorized into this like one thing that is supposed to somehow make you unique. It's so ridiculous, and it was never meant to be a unique thing. It was a way for like psychologists to categorize you. So it's so hilarious to me that people are seeing this as like an expression of their individuality. That's how fucking brainwashed we are, Another good example would be like college essays and job applications, like the question on these like motivational letters that you're supposed to write to universities is like, tell us what makes you unique, right? Like, why is your unique perspective something that we should give a shot? So in translation, what that means to me, and maybe I'm fucking crazy, but to me that means perform uniqueness in a way that fits our brand, because otherwise you're not going to be chosen. You know what I mean? It's so funny. Come on, man. It's hilarious. So uniqueness is no longer your lived fact, okay? It's actually a currency. So it's like a resume line or like a niche market or like a data profile, okay? And here's where Stirner slices through the nonsense. Because when he talks about the unique, he's not telling you to dig deep and find your true self. He's not saying make sure you stand out. He's saying stop letting concepts of anything rule you. Okay, so for Stirner, the unique is not a stable identity or a hidden essence. It's just a shorthand for the fact that I am this one, here, now, unrepeatable, not accountable to any blueprint of what I should be. If you try to define your uniqueness, like I am unique because XYZ, I'm queer, or I dye my hair pink, or because I'm INFP, or whatever the fuck, you already slip back into the spook. So let's talk about why any of this shit matters. Because it does matter. And I am dead fucking serious about this. I really think that the implications of this suck, and that there are very few philosophers and philosophies that actually cut through that in the way that Stirner does. And that is my that's the actual reason why I'm doing all this shit, is because I truly feel that bringing this into, the discussion, or bringing this in bringing this to people, normal people, everyday people, is a way to change how we talk about and how we think about ourselves and our egos and our relationships to other people. And I feel like this is like super important to creating just a better environment. And I don't mean like a better environment in general, or like change the world, or, you know, build a outside collective in which we're all doing the perfect thing. No, I just want to put the shit out there so that somebody can pick it up and see it and be like, maybe that makes sense. Maybe tomorrow when I go see my fucking mom, I'm not gonna be a piece of shit to that person. Maybe I'm gonna actually be able to develop some sense of fucking, you know, encounter with other people. So this matters because the spook of uniqueness is extremely seductive, like any spook, because it disguises itself as empowerment. So it tells you you're special, but then it chains you to proving it. It tells you to be authentic, but only in the ways that are marketable and recognizable and socially approved. And that's the haunting. So you're no longer living your ownness. You're serving an ideal of uniqueness. And serving ideals in society, actually maybe read my last essay about vulnerability, is absolutely fucking horrid for ourselves and everyone around us. So this week's spook of uniqueness, not the lived, fleeting uniqueness that Stirner talks about, but the commodified, moralized, anxiety-inducing version that dominates our culture, is what I want to talk about in the next segment. I want to really dissect it. So I'm going to zoom out and show you where the spook came from, because this obsession with uniqueness didn't just appear with social media. It has a whole philosophical genealogy that goes all the way to this bullshit idea of modern authenticity. And once we see that history, Stirner's cut is going to show you how there can be a different kind of uniqueness that I think is much better for ourselves and the people around us. So let's look into that. All right, this is gonna get really I'm going to try to make this sort of philosophical, but also like for everyone. So yeah, if you have any questions about the shit that I'm yapping here, then feel free. I'll try to focus more on the comments this time, because I think this is a little bit more than usual, more like philosophically grounded than usual. But let's go. So the spook of the week showed how uniqueness gets packaged and sold. And, you know, this is the part where we kind of crack open the concept and like pull out the pins, right? So we're talking Stirner's Unique, or Der Einzige, and why it refuses to be the kind of thing you can wear like a personality badge. So I'm going to do three things. I'm going to say what Stirner means and refuses to mean. Then I'm going to run a brisk history of uniqueness so we see where the traps came from. And then I'm going to build a clean conceptual toolkit so you can spot the spook when it tries to creep back in. All right, let's try. So first, a disclaimer. Der Einzige is not the authentic self. It's not a precious inner essence. And it's not your quirks. It's a pointing gesture. So like saying this one right there. So where this keeps changing with you right now. So imagine Der Einzige as a pointing gesture. So Stirner couples the unique with Ownness, the concept of Eigenheit. And Ownness is not an identity. This is super important. It's a practice of appropriation. So I don't belong to humanity or the nation or the movement or the brand. I use what serves me and I drop what doesn't. There's no oath. There's no halo. You probably heard the line, I have set my affairs on nothing, and that is a deliberately complex sentence to make. It's a very thought through linguistic approach. The nothing here that we're talking about isn't despair. It's a cleared stage. No ideal gets to sit on a throne above me. So unique is that refusal to be under something, especially a concept of who I really am, quote unquote. So here's the cleanest way to hold the idea. The unique behaves like an indexical in language. So words like I, here, and now, they don't define an essence, they point from a shifting position. So if you try to turn an I into a what, you've already slipped into a type. And that's how a spook is born. But let's think about how exactly we got from Aristotle to coffee mugs that say be yourself. Okay? So let's do a quick historical tour of uniqueness, and I will point out the trapdoors along the way. This is how I'm going to approach it. So the trapdoors are like those moments where the idea looks liberating, but actually sneaks an obligation back in. So let's start with antiquity and the Middle Ages. So what Aristotle said is that individuals are this matter in this form. So in other words, you're not just an abstract concept like humanity, you are this particular human right here, okay? So then we have Boethius, who defined a person as an individual substance of a rational nature. So already you can kind of see the setup. Individuality has to be tied to reason. So this started a long time ago, this whole reason bullshit. Then we have Aquinas. Aquinas followed this idea and said, yes, we all share the essence of being human, but this particular, so you and me, this particular human is individuated by matter and dimensions. And then Duns Scotus gave us a term that still haunts philosophy to this day, which is Hickskiety, I think is how you say Hickskiety. Anyways, what it means is thisness. And what this is it is a principled way to say this one is irreducibly this one. Now, what's the trapdoor here? Let's come in with the first trapdoor. Even when they honor the particular, so that's what they're all doing, they always install a principle to explain it. So you get thisness, but as the general solution to something. So it's still a concept and a rule and a metaphysical framework. And Stirner is one of the only people that later deeply, directly, massively, cuttingly refuses this move. So he refuses to name the principle at all. But let's move on. Let's jump to late antiquity and then the Reformation stage. So Augustine, right? Augustine turned the whole thing kind of inward. So he said the singular soul meets God within. And what is meant by that is individuality comes through inner relation. And then we have Luther. And Luther kind of, in his own way, radicalized this and said that the conscience of the individual stands before God directly without priests as middlemen. And in a way, this sounds really freeing. But here's the trapdoor issue with this. The individual is special, yes, but always under a transcendent, quote-unquote, should. Okay, so you're singular, but your singularity is normed by an ideal that is outside of you, which is God in this case. And we all know how Stirner felt about this bullshit. Now let's move on to early modern philosophy. We have Descartes, cogito, right? Certainty is anchored in the I think. So that's the new ground of uniqueness. Then we have John Locke. John Locke said personal identity is continuity of consciousness. So if you can remember being you yesterday, then you are the same person today. Then we have Hume. And Hume said the self is just a bundle of perceptions, basically. What we're doing is we're perceiving things, and this is what he called a convenient fiction that can then be used. And then there's Kant with what he calls the transcendental unity of apperception, which is basically the built-in I think that has to kind of hover over every experience that you have. So for Kant, the self isn't something you find, it's the condition that makes all of your representations hang together in a way. Okay, what's the trapdoor here? So the trapdoor is that sophisticated apparatus is being named here, but the pressure is still there, right? So there's still the idea of be the right kind of I, rational, continuous, law-giving, okay? So the I becomes a form that you have to live up to through these philosophical approaches. Okay, now we're getting into the territory that feels a lot closer to the world that we live in now with the 19th century and Romanticism. And this is, of course, where Stirner's also like kind of, lingering around at the 7-Eleven, loitering or whatever. Anyways, point is, the 19th century is when the idea of uniqueness kind of really explodes into culture, like art, philosophy, religion. So let's look at Romanticism. So with Romanticism, we have this idea of the genius. The genius becomes the model of the unique individual. So we have like the poet, the visionary, the artist, the creator. And this person is like this massively amazing thing whose singular perspective reveals truth to the rest of us, okay? So we, can think of people like Byron or Beethoven. So people celebrated not just for talent, but for embodying a kind of sacred individuality. And their uniqueness itself was treated like revelation. Then you have dudes like Hegel. So for Hegel, the individual doesn't find truth by retreating inward whatsoever, but actually by realizing themselves through the universal, what he calls spirit. And this includes institutions like family, community, and the state. So your individuality only really matters if it's playing its role in the grand drama of spirit, becoming conscious of itself, in a sense. Then we have people like Kierkegaard, who kind of pushes in a different direction. So he insists on like a single individual, like the lone human being standing before God apart from the crowd. So for Kierkegaard, the danger is conformity, right? The way the public levels everything down. So uniqueness is framed here as like solitary confrontation with faith, in a sense. And then, of course, we have amazing, beautiful people like Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, who both cast the individual against the herd, which is massively important, obviously. So Schopenhauer thinks most people are trapped in the blind striving of the will, like chasing illusions. So the philosopher or artist is unique because they can step outside of that endless grasping. And Nietzsche takes this and kind of flips it into something more active. So he says that the unique individual is the one who can overcome themselves and break free from herd morality and create their own values. But there's a trapdoor here too. And the trapdoor is that individuality in this era is glorified, but it's also sacralized. So whether it's the romantic genius or the spirit or God or Nietzsche's heroic destiny, uniqueness is always crowned with something higher. So you get to be special, yes, but only if your uniqueness is serving genius or spirit or calling or destiny. So the individual kind of shines here, but always wearing a metaphysical crown. Now let's move into the modern and postmodern terrain. So this is kind of like where uniqueness starts to look even more like the world we live in, even more than before. Okay, so let's start with Heidegger. So he uses a term called Gemeinigkeit, which usually is kind of translated into mineness. Okay, so for him, the question is, how do I live authentically as my own existence instead of just kind of drifting in what he calls the world of the they. So inauthentic life is when you just kind of repeat social norms, and authentic life is when you face up to your own kind of limitation, your own death, and you claim your life is yours. Then obviously we have existentialists like Sartre, who radicalizes that in a way into his famous line, existence precedes essence. So there's no God, no human nature, no predetermined script. And so in a way, first you exist, and only afterward do you kind of define yourself through your choices. And that's liberating, but also, obviously terrifying. So he says we're kind of condemned to be free. So freedom itself is the burden of our uniqueness. Then we have people like Georg Simmel, who's kind of looking at everyday life in the modern city. And I thought this was an interesting focus here too. So he noticed that the metropolis creates both conformity and what he calls the style of difference. So everyone is kind of surrounded by strangers and bombarded with like fashions and tastes and subcultures. So to stand out, people cultivate like little marks of uniqueness, like a style, a way of dressing, whatever, an attitude, as a way of differentiating themselves. So the dude kind of predicted Instagram, gotta give it to him. Then comes Foucault, obviously. Michel Foucault, one of my favorites. He flips this whole thing inside out, right? So for him, individuals aren't pre-given. They're produced by regimes of power and knowledge. So think of schools, prisons, medicine, sexuality. These institutions don't just control us from outside. They shape how we even kind of understand ourselves as subjects. So uniqueness isn't something natural. It's already like manufactured by systems of discipline. And then we have people like Deleuze and Guattari who kind of, are still to this day like, I don't know, like the ones who took it really far, right? The ones who went really far with this whole, boiling capitalism down to its bare bones, like really stripping it down. So they talk about haexiotes again, but now they're kind of talking about it not like as a stable essence of a person at all. Because for them, singularities are flows and speeds and events. So like a child running in the wind, or like a day at a certain temperature or a rhythm of movement. So uniqueness is never about a stable subject. It's always about shifting configurations that pass through us. But also, I think I should do one honorable mention here, which is the liberal tradition, because I think that's politically relevant. So looking at John Stuart Mill all the way to like Charles Taylor, for them, individuality gets moralized into authenticity. So Mill argues that developing your individuality is not just a personal choice, but like an ethical good for society. And Taylor says the same thing in more modern terms, which is to say you have to be true to yourself. Okay, but with all of these, the trapdoor still is, by the time we reach liberal modernity, the idea of be yourself is a duty. It has become a duty. So you owe uniqueness, you owe authenticity. And the command is no longer just to be good, it's to be true to yourself. And that is how you're gonna be good. And if you fail, you're inauthentic and you're fake and you're less than fully human. So uniqueness, once again, becomes a moral requirement. And this is something that Stirner ain't fucking putting up with, okay? So let's talk about Stirner. He slices straight through this entire script, okay? All of it. So no principle of individuation, no sacred authenticity, no throne for the universal. He is not offering a better essence. He's saying no essence rules at all. So what is left is just this one, me. I'm focusing in on me and what I want, what I'm doing, and whatever the fuck anyone else wants or cares about or does in my situation, in my position right now as I am, is not important. It's not something I need to think about, justify, rationalize, focus on, apologize for, or anything. And this is why his focus is so deeply important. So by the time Stirner enters the scene, uniqueness is kind of weighed down with centuries of theology. I know I went a little bit past Stirner here, but I just wanted to also kind of show how even like postmodern thought is could still very much be supported by Stirner's support, by his thought, by his perspective. And it's just kind of not included in so many ways. So by the time Stirner enters the scene, uniqueness is, weighed down with centuries of theology, metaphysics, morality, and authenticity. Talk bullshit. So his move is to refuse the entire project. So to say uniqueness isn't a principle or a property, it's just the unrepeatable stance of this one. And that's the historical backdrop to the Spook of Uniqueness. So every step along the way, uniqueness got tied into an ideal, no matter how hard they tried not to do that. And the reason why Stirner matters is because that is literally exactly what the fuck he is focused on. So Stirner's brilliance is the cutting the crown clean the fuck off. Okay, but let's pause here for a second and talk about some of the ways in which Stirner's concept of the unique gets completely misunderstood. Because there's one reliable thing about spooks, and it's that people will recreate them even in the very act of trying to escape them. So there are, in my opinion, 3 classic misreadings that come up again and again. The first one is that the unique equals the authentic self. So this is like the Heidegger, Sartre, James Taylor vibe, right? So become authentic, not inauthentic. Be true to yourself. And Stirner isn't like grading modes of selfhood. He's not saying choose the authentic path instead of the inauthentic one. He's literally, his entire project is subtracting the entire grading scheme. Okay, so the unique isn't a mode of being, it's the refusal to be captured as a mode at all. Okay, second misreading. The second misreading, I think, is that the unique equals a metaphysical core or a soul. No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. That is the medieval and romantic temptation of this idea of the self or the ego or whatever the fuck, right? But the unique is different. So there's this idea that like, you know, since I'm unique and everyone is unique, surely there's some like holy kernel inside me that makes me truly who I am. But Stirner's response is different, okay? And this is why it's important, because this is what he is focused on. The moment that kernel starts issuing orders, it becomes a spook, okay? So I might use a story of me when it serves me, but I don't need to use it. I don't need to fucking go with it. I can just change it. I don't have to bow to it. My essence, what if there were essence and it was there, I could use it, but I didn't need to. Okay? So that nullifies the motherfucking essence, doesn't it? All right, so third one is the unique equals an asocial atom. This is like when people try to kind of like align the unique with the solipsist idea. No. Period. No, that is not what it is. Stirner doesn't say reject relationships or think everybody's an NPC, okay? He says reject idols. Idols. He distinguishes between state or society, treated as sacred persons, and the union of egoists, okay? This is people who freely entered and freely exited any sort of situation, any encounter, and there's no fucking mystic glue. Okay, so relations aren't denied. What's denied is the idea that they come with cosmic obligations. Now, let's work on this toolkit I talked about before. I want to give some clean conceptual moves to keep in your pockets when you're trying to spot a spook in the wild, or when you're faced with a spook and you just don't know what to do. Let's start with types versus tokens. So a type is a general kind. Human, artist, queer, introvert, visionary, whatever. A token is a concrete, one-off instance. So you, right now. So spooks happen when a type claims jurisdiction over tokens. Okay, when the sentence starts with, as a real, you must, So you're already in spook territory when that kind of shit comes up. Or even when it's implied in people's language, because they don't really usually say shit like that, because they know that they're going to be perceived as blah, 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 you know, narcissistic or whatever. So they kind of change it up. But Stirner's move is really simple here, and it's really helpful. Keep types as tools, not lords. Okay? Use them when they help you navigate. Don't let them issue laws over you. Okay? Even if they have the power to. Okay, just work on getting away with the shit that you want to get away with. Now, the second conceptual move to have in your pocket is to think about indexicals rather than definitions. So think of words like I, here, now. Okay, these are reference shifts depending on who says them. And Stirner's unique works in the same way. So it points, but it doesn't define. So the moment you define it, like I am an INFJ visionary empath with like a fucking cottagecore aesthetic, you've already retyped the token. Okay, so the spook just breathed a sigh of relief here, okay, because you fucked up. Now the third one, second order capture. So this is what I mean by that. Even non-conformity becomes a type, right? So once there are rules for how to be unique, you're right back under like a scheme of some sort. So the trick is to keep the pointer untheorizable, so the unique stays an act of appropriation, not a portrait of who you are. And then the fourth move in our toolkit is union without halos. Okay, and what I mean by that is, yes, you can collaborate deeply. You can love, you can make art, you can organize politically, but do it without sacralizing the fucking arrangement, okay? So join, contribute, but also leave when it no longer serves. Don't get all caught up in the ideal of it. So there is no such thing as cosmic guilt, okay? Work on your fucking guilt issues. The measure is use, not worship. Now, let's try to, because I think this will be helpful, let's line Stirner up to some of his philosophical neighbors to kind of really see the cut here. So let's line up Stirner and Hegel. So Hegel says the individual realizes freedom by becoming universal within institutions. But Stirner would most definitely reply to this: the universal is just another mask that wants my obedience, and I will use institutions like a tool belt, not like a church. Next one that I think is really important, let's set Stirner versus Kant. So Kant, as we talked about before, says legislate for yourself under universal law, but I think Stirner would say to that, even a law that you write for yourself becomes a fucking spook if it returns to command you. So the unique keeps lawmaking as a capacity, but not as a code. So this is kind of like, a move against moral personhood. Now I would like to just kind of set Stirner against all the liberals. So liberals are all about this whole thing about like being true to yourself, right? Authenticity, individuality, blah, blah, blah. So be true to yourself kind of like sounds super cute until it becomes a duty, right? So Stirner kind of, what he does, what makes him so important in this realm is to say that Stirner kind of deletes the duty, right? So if a story of me helps me plunder joy, then great, right? But if it doesn't, then what the fuck am I supposed to do with it? Like, if it has zero importance to me and shouldn't be used, and it most definitely doesn't have any rights over me. Now, another one that I think is important is to set Stirner against Nietzsche. So there's so many similarities between the two, and it's almost like I feel like Nietzsche maybe could have kind of taken Stirner's thought and just never gave him credit for it. Anyways, I think there are some differences. So I think Nietzsche pushes self-creation and overcoming, and Stirner doesn't demand you become anything. So this is a big difference. So if you create values, then fine, but you don't have to worship the act of value creation as a virtue. Right? No like meta shoulds. And this is the big difference here. And I think the last one that I want to set Stirner against is Deleuze as well. But I want to be cautious here because I think Deleuze is one of the only people who kind of really extended the thought in a really important way. So Deleuze kind of dissolves the subject into flows, right? But I think the difference is that Stirner preserves, like while that's important to kind of dissolve the subject into flows as Deleuze did, I think what Stirner did is also helpful here because sometimes I feel that the dissolving of the subject into flows is kind of too much. So I think the good thing about Stirner or his usefulness in this realm is that he preserves the first person grip, right? But he does it without it becoming an essence. So it kind of helps keeping a stable perspective of the subject and not just turning it into a part of something. So not an essence, but as like the hand that takes, in a sense. So both are kind of allergic to essences, but with like different stakes about the I. And I think it's important that we don't just dissolve the subject into flows. Now, I think it'd be good to kind of steelman some objections that people might have. So I'm kind of just imagining the critique here, and I'm just like preemptively talking about it. So the first objection I think that people would have is, without essences or duties, isn't everything arbitrary? And I would say this: I can still prefer and commit and argue and plan because I do. So I'm not trying to like promote erasing reason here. Okay, I'm just erasing spooks. So reasons are instruments, not commandments. Now, the second objection I think would be, doesn't this actually kill solidarity? But I would say to that the idea of the union of egoists that Stirner has is solidarity. It actually is solidarity. It's just solidarity without the spooks. So we show up because we want to, and we keep showing up only as long as we choose. So that's harder than sacred glue because it's maintained and not mythologized. Okay, the third objection I would say would be, what about responsibility across time? And to that I would say continuity can be a project, but it doesn't have to be an essence. So I can kind of bind my future self with promises, but only so long as I keep owning them. So there doesn't have to be a metaphysical chain, just like an ongoing yes, in a sense. Now I want to think about, just kind of in a summarizing sense, the genealogy of the unique. So I want to kind of speed run how singularity kept over time getting moralized. So philosophically speaking, or looking at it from a philosophical perspective, we went from imago Dei to rational person to authentic self to now personal brand, as I mentioned in the first segment. So each step swaps vocabulary but keeps the same grammar of obligation. So first one is be worthy of God's image, then be a rational lawgiver, then be true to your authentic self, and then be consistent with your brand. And the reason why Stirner is so important is he cuts through and removes both the ground and the obligation. So not be truly yourself, but don't let yourself boss you around, okay? If yourself helps you, use it. If it hinders you, drop it. No guilt. So let's make this as crisp as possible. The unique, or der Einzige, is not an essence. It's an indexical. This one, okay? So the unrepeatable stands from which I act. Ownness is appropriation as method. So I own my powers and relations by using them, not by pledging fealty. Okay? Now, a spook is a type, an ideal, or a generality that claims jurisdiction over tokens, okay? Over me. And the union of egoists is a collaboration without halos, okay? Freely entered, freely exited, no sacred glue, just ongoing consent. Collaboration without spooks. And then we have second order capture, which I think is like when even uniqueness gets scripted into rules. So this is like what I always talk about when I talk about how rebellion is kind of, a commodified system, right? It becomes commodified as part of the structural makeup of how things work, okay? So the rebellion gets standardized. Now, let's close this shit up. If medieval philosophy tried to name thisness, then Stirner refuses to name it at all. Okay, because names love to become bosses. If romanticism sacralized the genius, then Stirner desecrates the altar, including the geniuses. If modern authenticity moralized the self, then Stirner demoralizes singularity. And if post-structuralism dissolved the subject, then Stirner keeps the first-person grip, not as essence, but as the hand that takes. So what makes uniqueness a spook? I think it's like this. I think it's a type pretending to be a token. It's a template that demands you match it or else. And the power of Stirner is that he flips the fuck out of this. He says that a token refuses to be typed. So no blueprint, no tribunal, no spooked ass self-image. So here's the pocket version that you can carry forward. The unique is a pointer, not a portrait. Ownness is use and not duty. Spooks are jurisdiction claims, and you can downgrade them into tools. Unions are living deals, not sacred bodies. And re-spooking is constant. So you have to try to subtract constantly. And this is your labor. This is your maintenance. And this sets us up for the next part, which is going to tell you why all of this is so fucking difficult. So let's stay rigorous. Let's stay unsentimental here. And let's keep the indexical alive, the I here now. Okay? Let's go. All right, so we've spent the last section kind of dissecting uniqueness, the way history kept turning it into a principle, a sacred essence, and a duty and all that. And we saw how Stirner refuses all of that and leaves us with the unique as an indexical, like a pointer and not a portrait. Now comes the practical question. How the fuck do we live that? How do we deal with the everyday hauntings of uniqueness in a way that isn't just another performance of being unique? And this is where Stirner's idea of ownness comes in. And it's also where psychoanalysis, especially Freud and Lacan, as you know, I love working with them, give us some sharp tools to understand why the spook of uniqueness is so sticky. So let's start with the superego. So Freud describes the superego as the internalized voice of authority. So like the nagging, moralizing, punishing part of us that says you should. And now in our time, the superego doesn't just say be good. It says like be unique, be authentic, stand out, find yourself, don't be ordinary, blah, blah. And Lacan obviously sharpens this. He says that the superego's real message is enjoy. Okay, today that translates as enjoy your uniqueness, enjoy your lifestyle, show the world that you're special. And the paradox is the more you try to follow that command, the more miserable you get, because the superego doesn't care about results. It only thrives on your guilt. So you scroll TikTok at 2 a.m. thinking, I'm not unique enough, I'm not interesting enough, my identity isn't fully formed, and that's the superego talking, dressed up in fucking pastel self-love fonts, right? The answer is Stirner's. It's recognize it as a spook and stop treating uniqueness as a command, period. But there's also an imaginary trap of the imaginary in the Lacanian sense. So Lacan would say that our modern obsession with uniqueness is rooted in the imaginary order, like the realm of images and self-reflections and comparisons. So think of like the mirror stage, like I always throw out these terms, but I don't know if you guys even know what I'm talking about. So the mirror stage is like the infant recognizes itself in a mirror, right? Sees a coherent image and kind of identifies with it. And this kind of happens to everybody, right? That's like the birth of the ego, according to Lacan. But it's also a misrecognition. So the self that we identify with is always external and always an image. And so, social media is basically like a giant hall of mirrors, right? So every time we try to be unique online, we're chasing an image of uniqueness that other people can recognize and reflect back. But that recognition always misses. It never fully captures us. And this is why being unique on Instagram feels like work, because you're trapped in the imaginary. You need the other's gaze to confirm that your uniqueness is valid. And Stirner's unique breaks that loop because it focuses on breaking that loop. So that is your job. That is your function. It doesn't need to appear as an image. It doesn't need recognition. It's not a reflection. It's the brute fact of this one acting now. So now let's think about what living ownness even looks like. So Stirner would say, don't try to be unique. Just notice when uniqueness has been turned into a spook and then make uniqueness a tool that you use after unspooking it, and don't let it control your life. So if you want to express yourself through fashion, go ahead, but do it because you like it, not because it proves something, not because you're trying to be different or separate or even just like everyone else. Don't do it because it proves your authenticity. Another one could be like, you want to cultivate an identity label like queer or neurodivergent. Go ahead. There's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But use it as a resource. Use it as a way of differentiating yourself for a certain purpose, not as like a tribunal that dictates how you have to live. Or, another one could be like, you want to join a community or a union, do it, but do it on your own terms and leave when it doesn't serve you anymore. You don't owe anything to anybody. So ownness is a practice of subtraction. It's peeling away the should from the can. But I think I want to psychoanalyze this a little bit more because I think it would help you guys understand what I'm talking about, because this episode, I know it's a bit much. So when uniqueness is spookified, it triggers all kinds of defenses. So like the reaction formation, like acting extra quirky just to prove you're not basic. Or maybe the projection, like accusing others of being unoriginal while secretly fearing it yourself. Or like displacement is another one. So obsessing over tiny markers of individuality, like music taste or zodiac signs or something, because the bigger question of your existence feels too overwhelming. Or regression is another one. So clinging to like teenage subcultures forever because those were the moments that you felt unique. All of these are ways of defending against the anxiety of not measuring up to the spook of uniqueness. So living ownness means kind of like catching yourself in these defenses and saying, shit, wait, who am I actually serving here? Am I serving myself or am I serving some ideal because I'm too scared to actually confront the limit that is inside of me, the limitations that I have? Now let's think about the union of egoists versus the community of uniqueness. So this is one more Stirnerian contrast, right? Modern culture builds communities around uniqueness. Like we have fandoms, subcultures, identity groups. And there's nothing wrong with that at all until those communities become sacred. Then uniqueness becomes a membership card. So you have to prove you belong by performing your specialness correctly. And Shina's alternative is, of course, the union of egoists. So that's like a gathering with no sacred glue, no demand for proof, no justifications type shit, You join because it serves you and you leave when it doesn't. It's like a collaboration without spooks. So living ownness means choosing relations like that and not community as essence, not community for moral reasons or whatever, but union as tactic. So again, let's get totally concrete here. How do you actually practice living ownness against the spook of uniqueness? I would say number one, check the voice. So when you feel pressured to stand out, just ask, is this me? Or is this the superego telling me to enjoy my uniqueness? Then another way of doing it would be use categories and don't worship them. Make sure you don't end up worshiping them. So say I'm queer or I'm autistic or I'm an artist if it's useful. But drop it the moment it becomes a leash. Then always remember that you can exit. You can always exit. You can walk away from unions, friendships, groups, labels, aesthetics whenever they demand your worship. You don't have to be there. You can leave. Unless, of course, somebody's literally like locking you up, then you can't leave, and that fucking sucks, but you know what I mean? Now I think it's always important in a Stirnerian sense, and I think he showed us this with his own approach, his own writing, his polemic, if you will. Laugh at uniqueness, man. Humor is Jenna's favorite solvent. If uniqueness starts weighing on you, then mock it, okay? Mock it. Mock yourself if you have to. Spooks hate laughter. And the last one is, you have to learn, my friends, to accept contradiction. Sometimes you'll look basic, man. Sometimes you look quirky. Sometimes you'll blend in. Sometimes you'll stand out. Ownness is not at all ever about consistency, okay? It is just about appropriation. So here's the takeaway. The spook of uniqueness tells you to chase an image, to prove yourself, to perform a self that fits the cultural script. It's an endless treadmill of, am I special enough? And Stirner's answer is radically simple. You are unique, not as an essence, but as this one now. So you don't have to prove it, you don't have to perform it, you just live it and use what's useful along the way. So psychoanalysis shows us why this is hard, right? The superego turns uniqueness into a demand, and the imaginary keeps us chasing recognition, and our defenses trick us into playing along. But living ownness means stripping those away and turning obligations into options and laughing at the spook whenever it tries to reappear. So the work isn't about finding yourself. Give that shit up, man. It's about refusing to let yourself become a spook. It's about staying unspooked, even when the culture around you demands that you fucking sparkle with a main character energy. And that's where Stirner's Unique is actually freeing, because it doesn't ask you to be anything. It just reminds you, you already are this one right now. All right, this week's spotlight, I'm doing it again, okay? I'm doing it again. I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck anymore. I'm gonna talk about my own text called Against Uniqueness as Stable Selfhood. I wrote it because I kept seeing Stirner's concept of the unique, or der Einzige, getting fucking flattened into something he, in my opinion, never intended. So I want to talk about that now. Let's talk about why I wrote it. So central to the ego in its own, so I'm going to read a part of my essay. Central to the ego in its own is Stirner's attack on spooks, abstract ideals that take authority, man, truth, reason, and freedom. What makes Stirner unique is that he doesn't offer a new ideal in their place. He proposes the unique without proposing the idol. So that's really the starting point for me, right? I was frustrated with how often people read Stirner as if he were giving us a new essence, the unique self. Okay, but in my reading, Stirner is doing the opposite. He's actually removing all pedestals and leaving only the brute fact of this one. Now let's clear up the misunderstandings. So I'm going to read you a quote from my text. The unique is not a hidden core of an authentic self waiting to be uncovered, nor is it a type or essence. It is rather the unrepeatable fact of this one, a living gesture that disappears the moment you try to define it. And that's the line that I really want to drive home. Because when people talk about uniqueness in our culture, from like therapy speak about finding your true self to fucking HR slogans about authenticity, they're still treating uniqueness as something stable that you're supposed to match. And Stirner doesn't let you have that stability. And he tells you that you yourself have to pull the rug out from that stability on a consistent basis, or you will be spooked. Now let me read another quote. Even readers sympathetic to Stirner fall into the trap of turning the unique into a principle. They end up making it a spiritual truth or a metaphysical essence. But Stirner's whole point is that nothing, not even the unique, should rule over you. Writing this essay is, in a way of subtracting, right? Subtracting that temptation. And I think that is something that needs to consistently be done to be able to unspook your own uniqueness. Now, another quote. The unique is not a self to be found. It's a stance, a practice. Ownness means using categories when they serve me, dropping them when they don't. Any label or role is only mine insofar as I take it up, never because it has authority over me. And that is what I meant by saying the unique is indexical. So like saying this one or I here now, it's not a portrait of who I am. It's just a pointer to the fact that I'm irreducibly here. So the moment you turn that into a portrait, into a brand, you have lost it. All right, now let's kind of connect that back to what we were talking about here. So in a way, this essay is me trying to anchor what we've been talking about in this episode, right? In the Spook of the Week, I pointed out how uniqueness gets commodified and moralized in our culture. In Dissecting the Spook, I traced how philosophy has kept turning uniqueness into a principle. And here in this spotlight, my essay argues that Stirner isn't offering us a principle at all. He's offering us a method of refusing principles. So that is what the unique is. It is a method. Let me read you one more quote from my essay. The unique cannot be stabilized into doctrine or selfhood. The moment you try, you've betrayed it. Stirner's insight is not a positive truth, but a subtraction. No essence, no tribunal, no ideal, only this one now in ownness. So that's the distilled takeaway. Against uniqueness as stable selfhood, because once you make it stable, you have re-spooked it. So that's my essay in the spotlight. I just wanted to let you know that it exists. Maybe you should read it? ? Writing it was my way of clarifying for myself as much as anyone else what Stirner meant by the unique. It's not a truth to uncover, in my opinion. It's not an identity to wear. It's the refusal of all of that. So it's a stance of ownness that no spook gets to dictate. And that's all I wanted to say. So that's a wrap on this week's episode of the Spookcast. We went from Instagram slogans to medieval philosophy, from Stirner's unique to the superego's demand to be authentic, and finally to my own essay, which you should most definitely read. I will link it in the description. And so I want to say it again. Uniqueness isn't something you owe. It's not a performance. It's not a brand. It's not a hidden core. Stirner's insight is that you are already this one now. Okay? Unrepeatable, unbound, and not accountable to any ideal. The work isn't to find yourself. It's to laugh at the spook that tells you you should. Or as Stirner would put it, I am not nothing in the sense of emptiness, but the creative nothing, out of which I myself create everything as creator. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the like if you're listening on YouTube, or leave a review if you're on Spotify or whatever. It really helps new listeners find the show, so do it. If you want more Stirnerian and psychoanalytic takes, you can subscribe to my Substack, where I post one essay a week if I'm in a good mood. It's called Recurring Paradox, or check out my e-zine, The Creative Nothing. You'll find links in the show notes as well. You can also support the show directly, either by sharing it with a friend who you think needs to hear this shit, or you can also throw some love my way on Patreon. Every bit helps. That keeps the spooks at bay. And of course, subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss next week's episode, where we'll be digging into, I don't know yet. We're gonna do a poll. If you want to request a topic, you have to sign up on Patreon and actually give me money for it. But there will be weekly polls on YouTube and Patreon if you want to vote for next week's topic. All right, this has been the Spookcast. I'm Aneka, reminding you not to let the spooks get you.